descendants of the individual tribes, that are going to be coming from the sons of Jacob, otherwise known as the children of Israel, and how their land will be divided up, the role that they will play, who they will be, the types of people, and the things that they will do. So a lot of that was what we saw in Genesis chapter number 49. The very last thing that happened in Genesis chapter number 49 was that Jacob actually died. So at this point, now in Genesis chapter 50, we're picking right up where we left off there. And so if you look, Genesis chapter 50 and verse number 1, it says, "And Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were fulfilled for him, for so are fulfilled the days of those which are embalmed, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spake unto the house of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found grace in your eyes, speak, I pray you, in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Lo, I die, in my grave which I have made for me in the land of Canaan, there shalt thou bury me. Now therefore let me go up, I pray thee, and bury my father, and I will come again. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury thy father, according as he made thee swear." Now, this is basically what Jacob had mentioned, that this is what his desire was. He wanted to be buried in the same place that the rest of his family was, where Leah was buried and others. But the thing that's interesting here, you can kind of think of just how different things are later on in the book of Exodus, where basically you have Joseph basically going to Pharaoh now and saying, "Hey, I need to go and leave this land and do something that my father, who's not alive anymore, made me swear to do." And Pharaoh says, "No problem at all. Not a big deal. You guys can do whatever you want." Look over real quick into the book of Exodus in chapter number 1. Might be on the same page if your text is small enough. But Exodus chapter number 1 in verse number 8. So the first part of Exodus is basically talking about Joseph dying. And now verse number 8, it says, "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land." So basically that starts the massive length of time where they're just trapping the children of Israel, they're treating them horribly, and then you have eventually Moses and Aaron coming to Pharaoh's, you have all the plagues coming, and over and over and over again, the one demand that Moses is making is, "Let my people go." And that God is telling Moses, saying, "Let my people go." You can think of the song that Mark Rogers sings a lot of times when he's here, "One More Night with the Frogs," and just Pharaoh continuously just saying no, 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 and he deals with the plague, he deals with the punishment, and it's hard, and he asks them to stop it, and they say the same thing that they said every time, "Let my people go," and they won't do it. But you can just see how different that is than Genesis chapter 50, where we're at, where Joseph plainly just asks, "Let me go to the land of Canaan, let me bury my father there," and Pharaoh just has no objection to it whatsoever. Joseph can do whatever he wants. And so really, that also kind of highlights the importance of Joseph in all of these things, and that when the book of Genesis ends, and we'll see this as we get closer to the end of the chapter, but they are just dwelling in Egypt. This is how they got there. That famine happened and everything else that brought all the brethren into Egypt. That's where they're buying the food and how they're able to survive. That's what brought them all in there. So that's, when you get into Exodus and they have to escape, the reason that they're there in the first place is because they were there and Pharaoh treated them so well and Joseph was ruler in the land and gave them all of these things. But it's so interesting how just that one person, Joseph, goes away and all of a sudden, every benefit that they had in the land of Egypt was just completely gone. And I don't think it's necessarily the picture that God was trying to paint here, but I do think, and you can really compare Joseph in a lot of ways to Jesus Christ. If you would, and I'm not comparing God to Pharaoh before I make this illustration, but if you could think about the way that Israel was treated in Egypt with Joseph, that they're free, that they're able to have all of the different blessings of the land and all the wonderful things, and then you see how they're treated without Joseph, and they're just on their own, and the new king in the land forgets Joseph, they have nothing. And if you kind of compare us with Christ and us without Christ, that's a pretty similar thing. If we would come before God, or we would just try to live our lives or see anything without Christ in our lives, we would have nothing. We would have an eternity in hell. We would have a horrible life. You might look at people that are living without Christ and see the vapor of their life might look pleasant, and they might have a beautiful home, or they might have a beautiful family, or their life might be good, and anything else like that. But our life is but a vapor, and it will pass away quickly. And without Christ, our life is nothing. All the things that we accomplish in this world are nothing. So, think about that. Joseph is taken away, and everything completely changed. If you took Jesus Christ out of our lives, everything would completely change almost immediately. Not almost immediately. So verse number 7, back in Genesis chapter number 50 now. It says, "And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. And all the house of Joseph and his brethren, and his father's house, only their little ones, and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. It was a very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan, and there they mourned with a great and very sore lamentation, and he made a mourning for his father 7 days. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians, wherefore the name of it was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond Jordan. And sons did unto him according as he commanded them. For his sons carried him into the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham bought with the field for a possession of the burying place of Ephron the Hittite, before Mamre. And Joseph returned into Egypt, and he, his brethren, and all that went up with him to bury his father, after he had buried his father. So they did exactly what they were going to do. They went, they took a bunch of people with them, they went to the land that Abraham had bought, they buried Jacob there, and then they returned back into the land of Egypt. Now, you can't kind of think, too, about how simple it was for them to leave. And when we get to the end of the chapter, Joseph will talk about how, hey, God is going to let you come out of the land of Egypt. He's going to take you into this promised land, and all of these things are going to happen. God will deliver you out of that. But really, you could think about this logically. They had an opportunity to just leave the land of Egypt and go into the promised land right then. They could have just, while they were able to, take all of their family, take all of their flocks, and just, bury Jacob where he was going to, and then just continue on their journey and make it right to the promised land. But instead, they returned back. And now, one of those things is that they were being treated so well in the land of Egypt, and that they, had no reason to leave. Pharaoh was treating them so well; they were taken care of. There was everything with the famine, and it was just a safe place for them to be. But also, there's a lot of stuff where if the only book in the Bible that you have access to is the book of Genesis, you can come away with a lot of different conclusions in this. But you look at the book of Genesis, and there's a lot of stuff, especially just when you know what happens in the book of Exodus, where you have them trying to escape, and you see just the stronghold that Egypt has on all of the Israelites, and just they can't get out, they can't escape, there's all this trouble. there's almost a piece of, at least I feel like when I'm reading the book of Genesis and I see them go into Egypt at the first time, it's just, no, don't do that. Turn around and, go the other way. But, God had a purpose for them going into Egypt in the first place. And we'll look at one of those purposes in a moment with Joseph and his brethren. But the other purpose, when you're reading in the book of Exodus, was simply for God to demonstrate his power. In that Pharaoh continuously was hardening his heart. And Pharaoh would harden his heart, and God would harden Pharaoh's heart to show and demonstrate his power. Because ultimately, while God cares about these people, God is also not just thinking about these individual people. God is thinking about what's to come of these people, and that is Jesus Christ. And in order for them to be a nation that, Jesus Christ is going to come from, in order for them to be a nation that's going to receive the law, that's going to be given the opportunity and obviously fail to maintain the law and keep all of these things and have all of the history that you read about throughout the rest of the books of the Bible, they have to have some type of, strong faith and belief in the power of God. And so how does that happen? Well, God demonstrates that power to them. God shows them. You think about going through the Red Sea with Moses later, and they part the Red Sea and they walk through, and the Egyptians are made up whole, swallowed up whole by the water. There are so many people today that try to downplay that and say, well, it wasn't actually the Red Sea that they were in, it was this other shallow body of water, and it just kind of spread out a little bit. Which, one, even if it was a shallow body of water, it would still be a miracle to spread it out, that they walk on dry ground and then close it back up. But it wasn't a shallow body of water. It was the Red Sea, and they spread it apart and they walked through it. You think about all the other miracles, like the water gushing out of the rocks for them, or you think about the manna from heaven that sustained them the whole entire time that they were there. It's all of the many things that God, through his power, showed them that wouldn't have necessarily needed to happen if they never went into the land of Egypt. And so maybe it's a consequential thing, but also even just the last thing that happened, where you think about the blood on the doorpost, and that there's the blood, that if the angel of the Lord sees the blood, that it'll pass over you. Is there a more prophetic passage of Jesus Christ found in the Bible that talks about just that his blood cleanses us of all our unrighteousness and all of these things? That wouldn't have happened had they not went into the land of Egypt. And sometimes God does things, and God has situations take place to demonstrate his power and to increase the faith of those that believe in him. And the children of Israel that were there, while we can look later after they escape, and they had a lot of problems and they weren't necessarily thankful, and the vast majority of them didn't even make it into the promised land and they died in the wilderness, there was certainly very strong faith in a lot of things that were shown to those people that was stronger than when they were in Egypt, and just seeing all the wonderful things that God did for them. So there was a reason that they returned to Egypt. And, carnally speaking, it was because Egypt was a good place for them to be at that time. They had the food that they needed. They said that they were going to come back and could have escaped. But spiritually speaking, God wanted them to return to Egypt because God had a plan for them in Egypt, and God had a plan for them to get out of Egypt eventually to go to the promised land that he had for them. Now, verse number 15, in Genesis chapter 50. It says, "And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. And they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall ye say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren and their sin, for they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. And his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. My opinion is Joseph didn't believe them for 1 second that this is something that Jacob said that he was going to do. Because there was nothing of like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do that because Jacob said this or anything like that. He immediately hears this news in this story, which is, you think about it, I mean, he was literally just right there with Jacob. He's the one there when he dies and talking to him and everything else. You think if there was something this major that it impacts all of his children, that he would probably just directly tell Joseph himself, hey, don't take out any anger on these guys. But so they all get together, they're worried, they send messengers to Joseph. They don't even say this directly to him. They send a messenger to Joseph to say, hey, right before he died, he said, don't hold us accountable for the things that we did. But Joseph immediately, his response was just to fall down on his face and weep that, they were even thinking this. And they're talking to him, they're bowing down to him, saying, we will be your servants, we're going to do whatever you ask of us and everything. And his response is just, in verse number 19, fear not, for am I in the place of God. And again, while we can look at what happened to Joseph and just think about when he was only 17 years old, being thrown into a pit, being sold off, and all of the different trials that he found when he was in Egypt, finding himself in a prison cell, finding himself just, really in significant danger for his life. But when he was able to see and interpret the dream of Pharaoh and able to understand the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine, and basically able to save millions of people's lives by telling them about this famine that was going to happen, able to give them all the information that they needed, rather than to try to use that time to profit and sell, they used it to store. And then when people came in and needed food, they were able to provide them with food. And so none of that would have happened. Pharaoh wouldn't have had that dream interpreted. The sons of Jacob that threw Joseph into that pit, had they not had the opportunity to send Joseph away to Egypt and then come to Egypt later to get that food, when they would have went to Egypt, there would have been no food because no one would have interpreted that dream for Pharaoh. All of the people that Pharaoh typically would have to interpret dreams before that were all there, and all of them failed. No one could provide a clear interpretation of it. No one could give any clear direction. Joseph was the only person all throughout the land of Egypt that was able to interpret that dream. And so while Joseph, I'm sure at the time, being thrown into the pit, having his coat of many colors stripped off of him, and everything that his brothers did to him, while I'm sure he was very upset with them at the time, I think as time went on, it became much more clear for him that, hey, you know what? This was actually all God's doing, and genuinely had no, hard feelings towards them whatsoever. And I have felt things like that in my life, and just experiencing something, and something's very difficult or very hard, and, at the time, it's angering, or at the time, you're just upset about it, but then you just give it a little bit more time, and, and sometimes a little bit more time is like years down the line. But where you can look back at that tragedy that happened, or look back at that difficult thing that happened, and say, you know what, God was actually all over that situation, and it's probably better that things happened the way that they did, and God took care of us the whole entire way through. So rather than sitting back and thinking of all the bad things that have happened in our lives, and how we can get revenge on someone that wronged us or anything like that, we can look back at bad situations and think to ourselves, well, what really would have happened if that played out the way that I wanted it to? Where would I be today had this situation went right? You just think about this in your life, because you know what? Every single person in this room has probably had something bad happen to them, where they felt betrayed, where they felt that they were wronged in some type of way, or just that life didn't treat them fairly. You know what? All those instances of time, I'm sure that we've got the ability to look at those opportunities and say, God was with us in those situations, and that God has delivered us from any of the evil that those situations would bring on us, and that even if we did experience the trials and the difficulties and the tribulations of those evils that came into our lives, that God found a way to use them for good. I think all of us can testify to that. I think throughout history, people have been able to testify to that. And that is sincerely how Joseph felt. And so when his brethren are coming to him and asking him, please don't hurt us, please don't kill us, please don't destroy us because of this evil that we've done to you, forgive us, Joseph doesn't even really have anything to forgive them for. He's not demanding an apology from them. He's thankful to God. As far as Joseph's concerned, in his point of view, his brothers aren't even involved in the situation whatsoever. This was all the doing of God. So he has no ill will towards his brothers or anything like that. And so when you think about how someone may have done something bad to you, if you're able to look and think about how God was able to use that situation, or God was able to eventually use it to give you a more significant blessing or anything like that, when you're able to look at those situations like that, you should also look back at the person that might have stabbed you in the back or betrayed you or anything like that and feel the exact same way that Joseph felt towards his brother. If you can say, actually, this whole entire thing was all God's doing, then why hold another person accountable for what you're attributing to God doing? That's how Joseph responded to his brothers there. And that's how we should respond to people that we genuinely believe God was involved in the situation and made it better for us in the end. In verse number 22, it says, "And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation, the children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Jacob took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. And Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin." So here we have it closed out, and that's basically the book of Genesis. And I've still got a little bit more, we're not done yet. But Joseph is telling them the very last thing that we see in the book of Genesis is Joseph telling the children of Israel, don't worry, the land that God promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, he will deliver you out of the land of Egypt. Now notice, they're not even really having any problems or trials in the land of Egypt at this time. But he specifically says, God will deliver you out of the land of Egypt into the new place that he promised. He might have actually not used the word deliver, but he certainly used it a lot in the book of Exodus. I'm just thinking about the book of Exodus. I'm saying this. But he's going to bring them out of the land of Egypt into the land which God promised them. And as we wrap up the book of Genesis, let's just take a 50,000-foot view of what the book of Genesis is. Because obviously it's the beginning of the Bible, but this is also recording the beginning of time. This is where God created the world in 6 days. He rested on the seventh. He made man, which was Adam. Then he made Eve. And this is where sin enters into the world afterwards, where they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They're basically cast out. You've got, Seth eventually is following Adam. You've got the murder that takes place right before that. But you just have these generations, and then you have all these different people come up. And they're all just completely gone wayward. They're not with God at all. They're not following him in any way. And this is where you have the flood come. But there's one man that found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and that is Noah. And so Noah now, we kind of reset the clock, and we've got about 2,000 years of history that are just, ended with the flood. Noah comes into the picture. Noah builds the ark. Noah survives, and you've got Noah and his 3 sons and their 3 wives and 2 animals of every kind. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and they have all of, the world that, as they knew it, completely wiped out and destroyed. And it's just starting over from scratch. You go a little bit further forward, and then you find out about a man named Abram. And you have Abram, and eventually he finds a wife named Sarai. And he's a wealthy man, but he doesn't have any descendants of his own. That God promises him one day that he's going to bring forth seed, and that it's going to be numbered as the stars of heaven. He's not even going to be able to count. And so he goes and tries to have Ishmael with Sarai's handmaid. That's not what God intended, and that was not the child of promise. Eventually, he has Isaac. Now, Isaac then, the story, he's led up on the mountain. God tells him to sacrifice him as some type of testament of faith. And the interesting thing that you read in the book of Hebrews, Abraham, with a heart full of faith, believed the promise that God made him, that his seed was going to be numbered as the stars of heaven, and that was going to be done through Isaac. He believed that if he would have killed Isaac, that Isaac would have been resurrected. Notice, there's never been a resurrection happening at this point. But Abraham believed God so much that he was going to kill him because he knew that if he did, God made a promise to him that he was going to bring seed through Isaac to him and that he would be resurrected. God stops him. He doesn't have to. He understands that he's going to faith, and then he's got this covenant that he makes with Abraham. And then basically you've got Isaac come along, you've got Rebekah that he marries, you have Jacob and Esau, you have them split up, and then there's just all of the constant fighting. Then you've got Joseph come along. But all of these things, it's not just, following a family for no reason at all. It's all really leading to the point where we're following all these people. We see the promise made to Abraham. That same promise applies to Isaac, the child of promise. Then you've got Jacob, that while Jacob had many flaws that you can read about, the same promises applied to him, that he eventually has his name changed to Israel, and then all of his children aren't just necessarily the children of Jacob, they're the children of Israel. And then you end the book of Genesis, where Jacob, Israel, tells all of his individual children the blessings that are going to come to them, the hardships that are going to come to them. And Genesis 49 is basically just a prophecy of what really is going to happen with the rest of his children as they go through that land. And then, like I said, it just happens. You read in the book of Exodus, and they make their way out. You see Leviticus, the laws given. You see Numbers, they're all numbered. You see Deuteronomy, they're making their way towards the promised land. And then in the book of Joshua, they enter the promised land, and they're there. And then you just see the different trials that they come up with. You see the book of Judges, and then you see 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and you see the kings enter into the land. So there's just all of this history that comes out over a period of time, but it's all leading to Jesus Christ. And so we have a very tight, narrow focus in the book of Genesis looking at Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But the reason that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are special, yes, they have a lot of faith in God, but God was going to bring Jesus Christ through that lineage. And specifically, it ended up being through the tribe of Judah, where you read about in the book of Revelation, he's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Jesus Christ came from these. And so now, today, where it's not necessarily that we're so focused on Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but we're not just focused on one nation of people, but we're focused on the whole entire world. And that is through Jesus Christ. So all of the book of Genesis, leading up to this point, there's many different things. You might be reading sometimes and thinking, well, how is this really relevant today? Does this really make sense? Is it worth it to spend all of our time reading about this different thing? all of it points straight to Jesus Christ. So if you're ever reading in the Old Testament and you're not really sure what you're looking for, look for Jesus, and that'll help it make sense for you. So we're done. We made it all the way through the book of Genesis. We saw everything there. So I think we're going to start in the book of Acts. I don't know about next week, because I think Buster Kinsey's going to be here, but let's close in a word of prayer. Father, I thank you so much for all you've done for us, Lord. Thank you for this time to be able to come together, look in the book of Genesis, Lord, and see all the things that you've done for us, Lord. We thank you for all of your blessings, Lord. We thank you for just the word that you've given us and recorded all these blessings.